I want to get this Restomod air unit mounted underneath the dash of our F100 this week. And there's a couple of things we need to do before we can just bolt it in. Number one, get our front end on so we'll know where the inner fenders lie against the firewall. We'll know not to run those in a weird spot. Also, we're gonna have to make a template under the dash and probably modify these mounts a little bit that came with this box, so it'll allow space for those hoses to route and to get it tucked up as tight as we can under the dash. So here we go. I recommend if you got some friends you can call to do this, you probably should. I guess we just don't have any. So we're going to make do with this apparatus. I hope I didn't make that look too easy, because it wasn't. But it looks like our cuts are going to work. Kind of nicely trimmed around those brake lines. And on this side, everything looks good as well. I did have to cut a lot of extra off. I recognize that I didn't need to cut all of this front. But the previous owner or someone had cut a big hole with like a cutting torch. It looked awful. I needed to trim that out. And if we want to weld on like a nice skirt or just use like a rubber flap like they do from the factory on a lot of vehicles to kind of hide that, we will. But the most important step for today was to get this in place so we'll know where we can run the hoses safely and not interfere with this inner fender. I'm going to take a piece of chipboard, kind of hold it in here, and essentially just trim kind of the maximum amount that it can be. This outside can be similar to the inside. Actually, but that'll put the black side in. We should probably do it in this direction. So we can see what we're doing in there. So I'm going to do my best to give you a good angle. Under this dash is kind of difficult, but I've pulled the carpet down and you can see this is the hardware that I ran through the firewall, and instead of filling those holes, I figured we would need this eventually to mount this AC unit, and I didn't want to have to drill a hole specifically for it because these kind of fall in a natural spot. And this is our template that we made. It should fit up in the shape the bottom side of this dash pretty good. Probably nick off this corner and that corner. But what I want to do is kind of put pressure against it where those bolts are, so we'll know where our mounting points are going to be. And we can drill those out. And we want to treat a template just like we would our finished component and actually bolt it in place. Yeah, left quite an impression on there. So this chipboard is about the same thickness as this 16 gauge steel. And while this is pretty heavy, we're going to do a lot of trimming, kind of like they did on this aluminum bracket. We want to use that thin material to kind of keep everything nice and compact. And once we transfer it over, it'll also be a lot easier to cut than something really heavy. So I'm going to get these holes punched and then bolted in place, and then we can start mocking up where the unit's going to mount. I'm going to see if I can keep my head out of the way and you can see what I'm looking at. Hold the unit up here. I need room for it to clear the ductwork. I don't really want the hoses to come down here and be visible in the cab, which kind of only leaves the little area right here in this top right corner. I'm definitely going to have to cut off some of this bracket to move this unit over as far towards the center as possible to give us the room we need. I'm also going to need, it appears, to trim this off some, because the way things are looking, we may just have to use a grommet to go through the firewall instead of these fittings. And here's why. I really need these to run out and go through the firewall immediately, and there's not enough room to have that fitting and then this fitting and then the firewall fitting before this makes contact. I believe, based on some trial and error, that we can actually have the hoses made up, and if we have these grommets in the firewall, we can actually force the fittings through them and not use that bulkhead stuff at all. I kind of hate that that came with the kit, but the goal is for it to look clean. And anytime I've ever done anything with hoses and fittings and crimping and all the O-rings and all that good stuff that's involved, the less joints the better. Same way with wiring, the less butt connections, etc., the better. So if I do it this way, it eliminates two of the fittings on each line and potentials for leaks. It just won't look quite as cool to not have it threaded in the firewall, but it'll still look super clean. And to be honest, the air conditioning system is not the focal point of this engine bay. So I've done some trimming on the AC bracket as well as trimmed up our template for our mounting plate. So we should have a little more working space to kind of put this where we think it's going to live. Give us room to do what we need with the ductwork as well as our mounts. Little adjustment here. And we can transfer that to metal. Usually when you're cutting into a squared off piece of steel or wood, you kind of want to make sure you utilize what's going to be your scrap the best, and also use the straight edges that already exist. our mount plate is all trimmed up and holes drilled, and I have it mounted in place. Now I need to transfer over where our AC box is going to mount to it. Just confirm a few things before we go drilling holes and getting all crazy. Something else we're going to need to do, since we won't be able to get behind that AC box if we're going to bolt it to this plate, we need to weld these nuts onto this mounting plate so they'll just be there and we can screw them in from the engine compartment side, because when this goes back in, it's going to go in as an assembly and we're not going to be able to separate the two to access them. We're just going to hope that the plating on those nuts are going to be conducive for us to getting a weld on there. Otherwise, this could be a huge waste of time. Kind of cooking that nylon out of there that's locking force behind those nuts. Maybe it'll leave enough. Now, a bracket is made and fastened to the back of our AC box. So now we can take it apart and paint this panel, and I'll probably put some of our 3M sound deadening mat on it where it's not making contact anywhere, just to sort of help things out. Certainly not my best paint work, but it also is quite literally not going to show at any angle, so I'm sure it'll be fine. Not sure I'm going to do this by myself. I'm going to give it a good shot. Give it the old college try. If I get these two started, support it some. All right, so that is at least bolted in place. You can see how much room we have. Let's see if this light works better, to start dealing with this plumbing situation. My hope is we can put these 90s here and run them straight out through the firewall, and then we left with the heater core lines, which can go out over here. Depends on how sharp a turn we can make. There's even an opportunity for us to actually run like a 90-degree hose right there and then it may plumb out just before the AC lines or just below the AC lines. And that would actually look really nice to have them all kind of coming out here as a group. They'll lay in this indention that was here originally for the battery, which we relocated ours. We can make this transition over to the AC compressor and the water pump. That's the hope anyway. But we knocked out a big step of it today by making that bracket and getting that thing mounted, and now we can start concerning ourselves with plumbing. Also, getting that front end put on allows us to know where the plumbing needs to be, and we could also test fit the radiator and start doing that fab work before we pull it off, and then just do a little bit of rust repair and do the Raptor lining of the inner fenders. Not sure how much of that we'll get to next week. I guess we'll get done what we get done. But I call it progress, and I appreciate you guys watching. We'll see you next week.